Hey, you're listening to Horror Drift Stories. Before we begin, leave a comment with your location. I always read them. If these quiet, eerie stories are your thing, make sure to subscribe. Quick note, there may be a few ads early on, but after that, it's just silence. And the story. Now, settle in, let the world fade away, and listen closely. Story 1. 2 weeks ago, they found a body in a cave just a few blocks from the house where I grew up. My younger brother Jacob told me the day before Easter. I was sitting in an airport, waiting to board a flight from Vermont, where I go to school, back to my hometown in Kentucky for spring break. Jacob's message was short, the way bad news usually is when it comes from someone who doesn't know how to talk about it. A corpse had been discovered in Needle Caves. The dead man hadn't been identified yet. A local couple found him early Saturday morning, wedged deep inside a passageway people call First Date. There were no signs of violence, no blood, no obvious injuries that suggested anything other than the cave doing what caves do. To everyone in town, it sounded like a simple accident, the kind you hear about now and then. Someone with enough experience to be confident, but not enough experience to be careful, pushing farther in than he should have, then getting stuck where nobody could get him out. Needle Caves sits on the edge of town, like it's always been there and always will be. It's not famous like Mammoth Cave, not the kind of place that draws tourists from all over the country, but locals are proud of it. There's a small, dedicated caving community in my hometown, the type of people who always have mud-stained boots in their trunk and a headlamp in their glove box. I've been in those caves since I was a kid. Jacob has too. For a lot of us, Needle Caves was a place you went when you wanted to feel brave, or when you wanted to get away from parents, and homework, and everything else. When I landed that evening, Jacob picked me up like nothing was wrong, like he hadn't just told me someone had died underground, near our house. He waited until we got home, and our parents were distracted before he brought it up again. Then, without much warning, he told me to grab my headlamp. I asked him what he was talking about, and he just said, "Come on," before they block everything off. I should have said no. I should have told him it was none of our business, that if the police were involved, it meant we needed to stay away. But there's something about going back to your hometown that makes you slide into old versions of yourself, even if you don't mean to. Jacob was still acting like the fearless kid who used to dare me into dark places, and I guess I slipped into the role of the older sibling who follows him to make sure he doesn't do something stupid. We walked to the caves with our headlamps and our jackets zipped up against the spring cold. It felt wrong to be going there at night, like the whole place should have been closed and quiet out of respect. But the caves don't look like a memorial. They just look like a hole in the earth, waiting. Needle Caves has a lot of roots, but First Date is the one people talk about, even if they've never been inside. The main chamber is big and almost beautiful in a way you don't expect. Underground, the ceiling rises high above you, and the stalactites look like teeth. There are smooth rocks near the center, where people sit or lie down and shine their lights upward, pointing out shapes in the formations, like it's a night sky. First Date is hidden farther back, behind a massive limestone pillar that makes it easy to miss unless you already know where to look. It doesn't look dangerous at first. That's part of the problem. The opening is wide enough that you could walk into it without thinking much about it. The floor inside is unusually level too, like a hallway carved on purpose. The passage feels inviting for the first few yards, like you're stepping into something simple and safe. Then it narrows. The farther you go, the more the walls taper inward. At first, you can still turn your shoulders. Then you can't. Then you have to angle your body. Eventually it gets so tight that even kids can't squeeze through. People call that point the choke, the bottleneck, the pinch point. Supposedly, beyond it, First Date opens up again into a small chamber. That's what the older cavers claim. But as far as I know, no one has ever actually made it past the pinch point. Not in any way that left them alive to brag about it, anyway. When Jacob and I got close, we found the cave entrance half-heartedly blocked with caution tape. It wasn't the clean, locked-down scene you see in movies. The tape sagged. Someone had clearly ducked under it already. Jacob didn't hesitate. He lifted it and stepped through like it was a ribbon at the end of a race. I followed, my stomach tight. Inside, everything sounded bigger. The cave took every noise we made and threw it back at us. As we moved toward the main chamber, we heard voices echoing from deeper in the dark. There were several distinct voices, but the words didn't carry clearly. It sounded like people talking in another room, just out of reach. My first thought was that it was police or search and rescue, and I almost turned around right there. Jacob kept going. He slowed down, though, and angled his head as if he was listening for something specific. Then the voices stopped, not fading away, not getting quieter with distance. Just stopping, like someone had flipped a switch. We stepped into the main chamber expecting to see people, but there was no one there. It was empty, just rock and darkness, and our headlamps sweeping over limestone. The place felt disturbed anyway, like we'd arrived right after something happened. Jacob motioned toward the pillar, and we made our way behind it. That's where First Date was. I remember holding my breath as I aimed my light into the opening. The body was wedged sideways deep inside, maybe 10 meters back. He wasn't lying down. He was pinned upright by the rock, held in place so tightly it looked impossible. The limestone pressed into him, like a hand. The skin of his face was pulled taut toward his ears, stretching his mouth into something that almost looked like a smile if you didn't think too hard about what you were seeing. His head was turned toward the entrance, and his eyes were open. There was something horribly clean about it, like a picture framed by jagged stone. My headlamp made his face stand out in a circle of light, and the darkness around him made it feel unreal, like I was looking into a toy viewer from childhood. It didn't feel like I was looking at a person who had lived. It felt like I was looking at an exhibit. I didn't step into the passage. Neither did Jacob. We stood at the mouth, silent for a long moment, listening to our own breathing and the quiet drip of water somewhere deeper in the cave. On the way out, as we climbed and squeezed through the familiar routes toward the surface, I finally asked what I'd been thinking since we arrived. "So what now?" I said. "Are they just going to leave him there forever?" Jacob shrugged, like it wasn't his problem. He told me there had already been one attempt to pull the body out, and it didn't work. The man was wedged deeper than anyone could understand. Authorities were still figuring out how to bring search and rescue teams and equipment down safely. Needle caves had never had a death before. No one had a routine for this, and from what Jacob had heard, the dead guy didn't have family in town pushing for a fast recovery, which meant everything moved even slower. For the next couple days, the story spread through town the way stories always do. People had theories. People had opinions about what kind of idiot would crawl into First Date far enough to get stuck. People acted like death underground was something that happened to other communities, not ours. Like Needle Caves was a local hangout spot, not a place that could kill you. On Tuesday evening, my parents asked me to round up my younger siblings for dinner. Jacob wasn't answering his phone. Every call failed. At first I assumed he was just ignoring me. But after the fourth try, I got that familiar older sibling dread. The feeling that, if something stupid was happening, Jacob was probably in the middle of it. I knew where to look. When I got back to Needle Caves, I found a small group gathered around the entrance to First Date, 5 of Jacob's friends. They all looked up when they saw me, and the expressions on their faces shifted fast. Embarrassment, guilt, and that desperate look teenagers get when they've been caught doing something they know is wrong. Then I saw why. Jacob was inside First Date. He was deep enough that his shoulders were almost brushing the walls. By my estimate, he was no more than 2 arms' lengths from the corpse. He was calling back to his friends, bragging about how close he was, how he was almost touching it. I didn't scream at him in front of his friends. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of watching a family argument. But the second he wriggled back out, I grabbed his arm and told him we were leaving. He tried to laugh it off until we were far enough away that his friends couldn't hear me. Then I let him have it. I told him it was disrespectful. I told him it was reckless. I told him there were diseases you could catch from messing with a rotting body. I reminded him that the cave was a crime scene, even if the death was an accident, and that getting caught down there could seriously mess up his life. He rolled his eyes and said I was being dramatic, which is Jacob's favorite sentence. But when I turned back toward the passage, planning to shine my light inside and make sure he hadn't done anything worse than get close, I noticed something that made my mouth go dry. The body looked farther back. I know how that sounds. I know what people say about depth perception in caves, about shadows and angles, and how light can trick you. I wanted it to be that, but I'd been here 2 nights ago. I'd seen exactly where the corpse was wedged. Now, the man was deeper. Not by an inch or 2, by enough that I could tell even without measuring. And his face looked different. Before, the rock had pulled his skin back toward his ears, stretching his mouth into that awful near smile. Now his cheeks were bunched toward his nose, and his lips were pushed forward, like a pout. 2 days ago, it had looked like he died trying to force himself out, toward the entrance. Now it looked like he died trying to move backward, away from the exit, like he'd been crawling deeper when he stopped. I asked the group, trying to keep my voice steady, if anyone had touched him, if anyone had tried to move the body. Jacob's friends immediately denied it, all talking at once. Jacob swore he hadn't touched him either. One of the boys suggested bloating, saying maybe the body had swollen and shifted. That sounded reasonable enough on the surface. I wanted to accept it. Before we left, Jacob told me he'd heard the police were planning a recovery soon. He said that starting the next morning, Needle Caves would be blocked off completely, at least for a while. That night I went to bed thinking about the corpse's face, thinking about how it looked like it had moved without being moved. I told myself it was my imagination. I told myself caves play tricks, that your brain hates uncertainty and will invent patterns to fill in gaps. At 2 a.m., Jacob woke me up. We share a room when I'm home, which is part of why I never feel fully like an adult in that house. I opened my eyes to see him pulling on clothes in the dark, moving fast and tense. He whispered that he'd lost his phone in First Date. He said he was sure the police would find it during the cleanup. He was terrified they'd keep it, or that he'd get in trouble for trespassing, or both. He said it like those were the only possible outcomes, like there was no third option, where he just accepted the consequences of his own actions. I was exhausted. I was irritated. I was also the older sibling, which meant some part of my brain immediately jumped to damage control. I told him to go back to bed. He argued. He said he couldn't sleep knowing his phone was down there. He said he needed it. He said our parents would kill him if the cops showed up with it. Finally, exasperated, I told him I'd go get it. I'm the better caver. I'm more efficient when I move through tight spaces. And if anyone got caught, I'd have a better chance of talking my way out of it than Jacob would. That was the logic I used anyway. By 3 a.m., I was back in Needle Caves alone. The air felt colder than it had before. The quiet felt heavier. I moved quickly at first, then slowed as I got closer to the main chamber. That's when I heard voices again, echoing from the darkness ahead. My first thought was that search and rescue was already down there, that maybe the recovery team had started early, but something about the sound stopped me. It didn't have the rhythm of normal conversation. I could tell there were multiple voices, and they were close enough that I should have been able to make out words, but I couldn't. It sounded almost wrong. Not just muffled, not just distorted by distance, like the sounds weren't meant to be heard by someone like me. I turned off my headlamp. In total darkness, I stood still and listened. The voices were still there, overlapping, low and constant. For the first time, it occurred to me that what I was hearing might not be English at all. It could have been another language, or it could have been something that only resembles language. I kept my light off and edged forward, using the wall to guide me. I moved slowly, step by step, until I heard one last cluster of murmurs. Then silence, abrupt and complete. I waited, holding my breath, but nothing came back. No footsteps, no whispers, no movement. Just the cave. When I reached the limestone pillar, I turned my headlamp back on. The corpse was still in first date. Jacob's phone was on the ground, a few feet from the bottleneck, close enough that I could see its shape in the beam of my light. I'd brought one of those grabber tools, a reach extender you'd use to pick up trash without bending down. I thought I could snag the phone without crawling in too far, but the phone wasn't as close to the entrance as I'd hoped. To reach it, I'd have to get close to the body again, closer than I wanted. I stepped into first date. At first it felt almost normal. The floor was flat, and the mouth was wide enough that my brain tried to relax. That lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then the walls started to pinch. The rock pressed against my chest and my back, and my breathing went shallow without me meaning it to. The air smelled like rot, thick and sweet and heavy, the kind of smell that sticks to the inside of your nose. I pulled my mask tighter, but it barely helped. It just turned the stink into something warm and trapped against my face. I froze when I thought I saw movement ahead. It was small, a flicker. The man's head seemed to shift, like his neck was finally giving in under the weight of his skull. I aimed my light directly at his face and stared. Gray skin, waxy shine, eyes open and dull. I waited for more movement, for proof that I wasn't imagining it, but nothing happened. After a long moment, I forced myself to move again, shuffling forward the last few steps until I was close enough to reach the phone with the grabber. I extended the tool. The tongs slipped the first time, then the second. On the third try, they finally clamped around the phone. As I pulled it toward me, I heard a shuffling sound. I snapped my head up. My light jumped, and for a split second, the beam slid across the corpse's face just as the body started to shake. Not a gentle shift, not the slow settling of a dead weight. A shudder. Then the torso lurched forward violently. The head snapped down toward the chest with a crack that sounded like breaking wood. For one disoriented second, my brain tried to convince me it was collapsing under its own weight, that maybe gravity was finally doing what it does. But then, the body was yanked backward. It didn't slide. It didn't slump. It jerked backward through the bottleneck, like something on the other side had grabbed it and pulled with both hands. The rock scraped the body as it went, and the sound was awful, wet, and grinding. When the swollen midsection hit the tightest part of the pinch point, it split open like fruit that's gone too soft. Skin tore. Something inside gave way. I saw dark, slick viscera push out from the opening, oozing and stringing as the body was forced through a gap that shouldn't have been able to take it. I wanted to scream, but couldn't get enough air in. The face was the last thing to disappear. And I don't know if it was my fear trying to give meaning to a meaningless moment, but it looked at me as it went. Not blankly, not like a thing that was dead and empty, but like a person, like it was asking for help, like it knew exactly what was happening. Then it was gone, vacuumed into the darkness beyond the bottleneck. I stared at the empty pinch point, my headlamp beam trembling. On the other side of the gap, 3 men stood in the cramped space, huddled together in the gloom, as if they'd been waiting. Their clothes were filthy, caked with old mud and something darker that didn't look like dirt. Their hair hung in stiff gray ropes. Their faces looked wrong in a way I can't fully describe. Not deformed exactly, just worn down, like they'd been rubbed raw by stone and time. The one closest to the gap lifted his head and locked eyes with me. Then he smiled. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't even human in the way people mean when they say a smile is warm. It was jagged and yellow, like he was showing off something sharp. I started backing up, as fast as the tight rock would let me move. The man laughed. The sound bounced off the stone and seemed to come from everywhere at once. He vanished for a second into the dark behind him. When he came back, he was holding a long metal rod, something like rebar. He shoved it through the pinch point toward me. The end was sharpened. He thrust at me like a spear. The metal scraped the rock as he jabbed, but the tip stopped just short of my chest. I was barely out of reach, saved by inches and the fact that the passage wouldn't allow me to stand up fully. He said something to the other 2 men. It wasn't English. It wasn't anything I recognized. It sounded like words spoken with a mouth that had forgotten how to form them. Then all 3 of them scattered backward into the darkness, moving fast and quiet, disappearing into whatever space existed beyond the bottleneck. I didn't wait to see if they came back. I scrambled out of first date and made my way up toward the surface faster and sloppier than I ever have. I banged my knees. I tore my hands. I scraped my arms on stone. At one point, I half slid down a slope I normally took carefully, and I didn't even care. I just needed to get out before the cave decided I belonged to it too. When I got home, I told Jacob everything. He looked pale in the weak morning light, but he didn't laugh. He didn't call me crazy. He believed me. Or at least, he believed that I believed it. I could tell because he didn't argue the details. He just kept asking the same question in different ways, like if he repeated it enough times the answer might change. What do you mean there were men down there? Later that morning, after I'd cleaned the worst of the dirt off my hands, I went to the police station. I told an officer what I saw. I tried to keep my story straight, tried to sound calm, tried to sound like someone who wasn't making things up. The officer's expression didn't change. He watched me with that hard, disappointed look adults use when they think you're wasting their time. When I finished, he told me not to come in with pranks. He said search and rescue had already recovered the body hours ago. I left the station feeling like I'd stepped sideways into a different world. That afternoon, I called again, thinking maybe the first guy was lying or mistaken. The person I spoke to on the phone told me the same thing. The body had been recovered that morning. Needle caves would reopen to the public soon. It made no sense. Whoever I saw beyond that bottleneck wasn't search and rescue. They weren't wearing uniforms. They weren't using proper equipment. They looked like they'd been living in the dark. And even if they were somehow part of an official team, how did they get past the pinch point? Nobody gets past it. That's the whole point. Most maps show a small cavern on the other side, but there has to be more than that. There has to be another route, another passage, something people don't know about, something that either leads upward to a hidden entrance somewhere else, or goes deeper into an unmapped section of cave that nobody has explored. Either way, those men had been down there long enough to look like the cave had claimed them. Of course, when I talk to friends about it, they say I hallucinated. They say caves can mess with your head. They say darkness and stress and lack of sleep can make you see things. And I know that's always an option, technically. I don't have a history of hallucinations. I've explored First State before without anything like this happening. But I also can't pretend underground spaces don't do strange things to the mind. You lose track of time. You lose perspective. Your body is under pressure, literally and mentally. Still, I can't shake what I saw. I can't shake the way that corpse moved like it was being pulled by something that had been waiting for it. I can't shake the sound of that crack when the head snapped down, or the way the body split open at the tightest part of the rock. And I can't shake those faces, filthy and grinning, looking at me like I was the next thing they wanted dragged through that gap. Once my semester ends, I'm going back to Kentucky for the summer. Jacob and I have already talked about trying to get footage of the other side of the pinch point using a small RC rover, something we can send through without risking our bodies. I don't know if it'll work. I don't know if the signal will carry. I don't know if whatever is on the other side will let it come back. But I do know I'm not going to stop thinking about it until I have some kind of answer. In the meantime, I'm going to try to focus on classes and pretend I can sleep like a normal person. I'm going to try to forget the sound of those voices in the dark, the way they stopped the moment I got close, and that jagged grin in a place that shouldn't have had anyone alive in it at all. Story 2. I almost didn't notice him at first. I was driving along a small highway that cut straight through the forest, heading back after a camping trip. The road was quiet, the kind where you can go a long time without seeing another car, and the trees were so thick on both sides that it felt like the world ended a few feet past the shoulder. I was tired in that calm way you get after sleeping outdoors, when your body aches, but your head feels clear. Then something pale flashed in my headlights. I hit the brakes so hard, the car jolted, and the seatbelt snapped tight across my chest. The tires screeched, and the whole vehicle shuddered before it came to a stop, half in my lane and half on the shoulder. For a second, I just sat there with my hands locked on the wheel, heart pounding, trying to understand what I'd almost hit. A puppy. It was lying right in the middle of the road. At first, I thought it was already dead, because it didn't move at all, not even when my headlights washed over it. But there was a shape to its body that didn't look like roadkill. It looked placed, like someone had set it there and left. I threw the car into park and stepped out, the cold air hitting my face. The forest around me was silent except for the ticking of my engine cooling down and the distant hum of insects. My shoes crunched on gravel as I walked toward the small body in the road. Up close, the puppy looked worse than I expected. He was so thin, I could see the lines of his ribs through his fur. His legs were twisted at an angle that made my stomach turn. There was blood, not fresh and bright, but dark and sticky, like it had been there for a while. One ear was flattened against the road. His eyes were half open, unfocused, glassy, And he was still breathing. Barely. The breath came in tiny shudders that didn't look like they belonged in a living thing. It was like the smallest part of him was still fighting, even though the rest had already given up. I knelt beside him, not touching him yet, afraid that even the wrong kind of pressure might hurt him more. The closer I got, the more certain I felt that he wasn't a stray. There was something about him that said he had belonged to someone. His fur was too clean in places where it hadn't been soaked with blood. His nails weren't overgrown. He had that look domestic dogs have, like they expect people to be kind. My throat tightened. I felt that sharp, helpless anger that comes before tears. Who could do this? Who could look at something small and trusting and leave it here, broken, on a road where any car could finish the job? I hurried back to my car and grabbed the blanket I kept in the trunk, an old one with pink polka dots that I'd brought for the camping trip. I spread it out carefully, like I was preparing a bed, then slid my hands underneath him as gently as I could. He didn't yelp, which somehow made it worse. He was too weak to react. When I lifted him, his body felt frighteningly light, all bone and fragile heat. He smelled like dirt and fear and blood. And underneath that there was the faint, puppy smell that should have been associated with warm kitchens and safe floors. I wrapped him in the blanket and carried him to the passenger seat. He barely moved. His head lolled against the fabric. I kept one hand on him while I started the car, as if my touch could keep him here. The nearest clinic was about half an hour away. I told myself he could make it. I had to believe that. I whispered it out loud like a promise, like it mattered that he heard me. "Hold on," I said. "Just hold on." I drove faster than I ever should have on that road. My eyes kept flicking between the headlights, the narrow stretch of asphalt, and the bundle on the seat beside me. Every time his body shifted slightly with the movement of the car, a spike of panic went through me. I didn't want to imagine what was happening inside him. I didn't want to imagine that each bump might be hurting him. I must have looked insane, pulling into the clinic parking lot. I didn't even park properly, just stopped crooked in the first spot, and jumped out with the blanket bundle in my arms. The clinic smelled like disinfectant and medicine, and something faintly sweet, like dog shampoo. A woman behind the counter looked up, and I must have been pale, because her expression changed before I said anything. "Please," I blurted. "I found him on the road. He's hurt. He needs help." She didn't waste time. Someone came from a back room, took one look, and guided me through a door. A vet and a nurse moved with quick, practiced hands, unwrapping the blanket and lifting him onto a metal table. The puppy's eyes opened wider for a second, and his gaze landed on me. There was nothing in it except exhaustion. No trust yet. No fear either. Just a dull, distant awareness that someone was there. Then he closed them again. "Can you save him?" I asked, and my voice sounded too loud in that clean room. "We're going to try," the vet said, already working, already focused, but he's in bad shape. They asked me a few questions. Where I found him, how long it took me to get here, whether I had any idea who he belonged to. I shook my head at that last part, because what could I say? That someone had left him out there like garbage? The vet told me it would take time, even if he survived the night. Broken bones, dehydration, infection risk. He was malnourished too, like he'd been starving before he ever got hit, or thrown, or whatever had happened to him. I left the clinic that night feeling hollow. My hands still felt like they were holding him, even though they were empty. On the drive home, I kept seeing him in my headlights, that pale shape in the middle of the road. and I had to grip the steering wheel harder to keep from shaking. In the days after, I called the clinic more than I should have. Every time my phone rang, I jumped. When they finally told me he was stable, that he'd made it through the worst part, I sat down right where I was standing and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I started visiting as soon as they allowed it. At first, he didn't react when I came in. He was in a small kennel, bandaged and hooked up to tubes, looking too tired to be a puppy. But I sat near him anyway. I talked to him softly about nothing. I told him about the weather, about my job, about the stupid things Maya from work said, about the fact that I still couldn't stop thinking about who could hurt him. Over time, he started to respond. A blink when I spoke, a small movement of his tail that might have been accidental at first, but wasn't accidental the next time. By the end of the first month, he could lift his head and look at me properly. His eyes were still cautious, but there was something more alive in them. He started to eat small amounts. He started to gain weight. His fur looked less dull. His breathing became deeper, steadier, like he'd finally decided the world might be worth staying in. By the second month, he could stand. The first time he managed it, his legs shaking under him. The nurse clapped and laughed, and I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from crying. He wobbled, sat back down hard, then tried again like he was stubborn about it. That was the moment I started to understand that he wasn't just surviving. He had a personality. He had spirit. My visits became the best part of my week. I'd walk into the clinic, and before I even reached his kennel, I'd hear him. A bright bark, a scratch at the door, a little burst of excitement like he couldn't believe I came back again. His tail wagged so hard, his whole body moved. The staff started teasing me, saying I had a fan club. I laughed it off at first, told them I was just checking on him, told them anyone would do the same. But the truth was, I was already attached in a way I didn't want to admit out loud. I had never planned to get a dog. I'd thought about it in the abstract the way people do, like maybe one day, but my life didn't feel set up for it. I worked long hours. My place wasn't big. I liked my freedom. Then this puppy showed up in the middle of the road, like a question aimed directly at me. By the time the vet said he was cleared to leave, it didn't feel like a decision anymore. It felt like the only natural ending to something that had already begun. I took him home immediately. The first night was awkward in the way new things are awkward. He walked through my house slowly, sniffing the corners, testing the floors with careful steps like he didn't fully trust that he was allowed to be there. I watched him the way you watch a guest you desperately want to feel comfortable. I had prepared, because I couldn't help myself. I'd researched everything. What kind of food was best, how much to feed him, how often to walk him, what signs to watch for in case his injuries caused long-term issues. I'd bought bowls and treats, and a collar and a leash. I'd bought him a bed, one that looked too big for him, because I wanted him to grow into it. None of it felt like enough, so I did more. I made sure he always had water. I made sure the house was warm. I set up a corner with toys. I bought him soft chews and little training treats. I took him to follow-up appointments. I learned the rhythms of his body, the way he held himself when he was tired, the way he stared at me when he wanted something but didn't understand how to ask. I trained him the best I could, using patience and praise, because everything I read said positive reinforcement mattered. I kept my voice light. I made a game out of sitting, staying, coming when called. We practiced on our walks, on quiet streets at first, because loud noises still made him jump. Sometimes a passing truck would make him freeze, his whole body going stiff, and I'd stop with him, let him watch until he realized the sound wasn't coming for him. He learned fast. Too fast, sometimes. Like he was desperate to be good. He became the best dog I could have asked for. Cheerful, smart, alert. He followed me from room to room, then eventually settled into his own routines. Napping when I worked, waiting near the front door around the time I usually came home. It was a strange kind of comfort, walking into my house after a long day and seeing him there, tail wagging, like I was the most important part of his world. I didn't realize how quiet my life had been until there was another living thing in it. For a while it felt like we were healing each other. Then, one day he started acting different. It didn't happen all at once. It was subtle at first, small shifts that I tried to explain away. He didn't come when I called him the first time. Then, he didn't come the second time either. He stared at me with a flat look, like he was trying to decide what I was. On walks, he tugged at the leash more. He growled at strangers. Not everyone, but enough that I started to brace myself whenever someone got too close. At night, he would pace through the house instead of settling down. Sometimes he would stand in the hallway and stare at the wall for a long time, ears angled forward, as if he could hear something I couldn't. I told myself it was a phase. Dogs have phases. He'd been through trauma. Maybe he was finally feeling safe enough to let the fear out. But it didn't pass. It got worse. He became angry in a way that didn't match the puppy I'd carried into the clinic. He stopped listening completely, like my voice meant nothing to him. He snapped at me when I tried to take something out of his mouth. He barked at me in a frantic, wild way, backing away like I was the threat. He broke things he never touched before. Pillows ripped open, trash scattered across the floor, a chair leg chewed down to splinters. Once I came home and found the kitchen cabinet door hanging off its hinges. I stood there, staring at it, confused, then looked at him. He was sitting in the middle of the room like he'd been waiting, his eyes fixed on me, unblinking. I started to feel something ugly building under my ribs. I tried to get him under control. I did. I bought puzzle toys to keep him busy. I walked him longer. I tried different training techniques. I called the vet and asked if there could be pain causing it, if something had healed wrong, if his brain had been damaged, if there was some explanation that would make this less personal. They suggested a behavioral specialist. They suggested medication if anxiety was the cause. They asked questions about my home, my schedule, my tone of voice, my stress levels. I tried, but he didn't just act out when he was alone. He did it when I was there, looking directly at me like he wanted me to see. And then came the things I still can't explain in a way that feels sane. He scratched at the walls at first. That's normal, I told myself. Dogs dig, dogs scratch. Then the scratches started to look like lines, not random marks, but deliberate grooves that ran in repeated patterns, sometimes in clusters, sometimes in long strokes, like someone dragging nails down plaster. And the sounds he made changed, not just barking. Something else, a high, strained noise that wasn't a whine and wasn't a howl. It sounded too human in its rhythm, like a throat trying to force out words it couldn't form. Sometimes at night, half asleep, I would hear him making that sound, and I would sit up in bed with my heart hammering, listening, waiting for it to turn into an actual voice. I started to resent him. My cute boy, I thought, and then my sweet boy, because I didn't want to let go of that version of him. Then my poor boy, because surely something had broken inside him. Then, when I found another destroyed room, another mess, another long stare that made my skin crawl, the thought turned mean, my ungrateful boy. It shocked me the first time I thought it. But once it arrived, it came back again and again. easier each time, like a door had opened in my mind and wouldn't close. I could feel all my effort being turned against me. All that time, all that money, all that care. I had saved him. I had brought him home. I had made him safe. And now, he was making my home feel unsafe. One evening, after another day of him barking at me like he didn't know me, I lost my patience completely. I stood in the living room with my hands shaking, and he stood across from me, hackles raised, lips pulled back enough to show teeth. His eyes looked dark and hard. In that moment, what I felt wasn't love. It wasn't sympathy. It was something colder. It was the need to make it stop. The night I did it, everything felt unreal, like I was watching myself from far away. I waited until it was late, until the neighborhood was quiet, until the air outside had that empty, dead sound it gets when everyone is asleep. He was restless, moving from room to room, clicking his nails on the floor, stopping to stare at walls. I lured him close the way you lure an animal you're afraid of, pretending you're calm while your body is screaming. When he was near enough, I grabbed him and forced him down, my breath coming too fast. I found the rope I kept in the garage, the same rope I'd used once for camping gear, and I did what I needed to do to keep him from fighting me. I tied up his hands and feet. That's what my mind called them. Not paws, hands, feet, because the moment I did it, a sick certainty spread through me that I wasn't restraining a dog the way people restrain dogs. I didn't let myself think about it. I couldn't. He struggled at first, then stopped and made a sound that went straight through my skull. It wasn't barking, it was weeping, the kind of sound a person makes when they're trying not to, when they're trying to swallow it down, but it spills out anyway. I told myself it was just noise. Dogs make noises. Dogs sound like they're crying sometimes. But it followed the rhythm of sobs. I carried him to the car. He was heavier than he used to be, not because he was big, but because he fought the whole way in small jerks, as if his body refused to accept what was happening. I put him in the back seat and drove. He wept the entire drive. The forest road looked different at night. The trees pressed closer to the edge of the asphalt. My headlights carved a narrow tunnel through darkness. Everything outside that tunnel felt endless and alive in a way I didn't want to acknowledge. The radio didn't work. Or maybe I didn't turn it on. I can't remember. I only remember the sound behind me, that wet, broken crying, and the way it made my hands grip the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. I drove back to the same stretch of highway, the same place where I had nearly hit him months ago, the same shoulder where I had pulled over, the same dark line of road cutting through the forest like a wound. I stopped the car, dragged him out still wrapped in the blanket, and carried him to the center of the lane. For a second, I hesitated, not because I was having second thoughts about leaving him, but because I felt, very clearly, that I was putting something back where it belonged, that this was completing a shape that had been started before I ever arrived. I set him down. He lay there, bound and shaking, making that awful sound. Then I got back into my car. I didn't look at him again. I drove away, and in my rearview mirror, the road vanished into darkness, swallowing whatever I had left behind. As I drove, sadness welled inside me, warm and familiar, the exact same feeling I had when I first saw him in my headlights. Who could possibly have the heart to hurt these creatures? And the thought landed in my mind like an answer spoken by someone else. It was me. Story 3. It started back in February, which is why I can't just shrug it off as a one-time glitch. I've had my Alexa for 3 or 4 years, and it worked perfectly the entire time. I never had weird wake-ups, random music, sudden talking, nothing. I live alone in a quiet neighborhood where most of the people nearby are older. I'm on friendly terms with them, in the polite, wave and smile way. But we don't really hang out or chat much. I'm mentioning that because after what's been happening, I've started wondering if someone is getting into my house at night, or if someone is outside my house and somehow triggering it, or if something is wrong with my Wi-Fi or my account. I don't know. I only know that I'm not sleeping properly anymore, because every time it happens, my brain goes straight to the worst explanation. The first time it happened, it was around 4 or 5 in the morning. I woke up suddenly to the sound of Alexa at full volume, not normal volume, not a quiet little response like you get when you ask the time. Full volume, loud enough to cut straight through sleep and jolt me awake, like an alarm. At first I couldn't even understand what it was saying. The sound was muffled, like it was coming from the wrong direction, or being swallowed by the walls. My heart started pounding immediately. I lay there for a second, trying to convince myself it was part of a dream, but the voice kept going, and I could tell it was real. My bedroom is upstairs. The Alexa was downstairs in the kitchen. To hear it properly, I had to get up and open my bedroom door. I remember standing there with my hand on the handle, listening, trying to decide if I was actually going to step out into the hallway. It's hard to explain how fast fear shows up when you live alone. Your mind fills in blanks instantly. If something is wrong, there's no one else in the house to blame it on. And that makes everything feel personal, like it's aimed at you. When I opened the door, the voice became clearer. Alexa said something like, "I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that." Then there was a pause, a few seconds of silence, and it followed up with something about how it didn't know that one. I didn't catch the exact phrasing the first night, but it sounded like the kind of response it gives when you ask it to play something it can't find, or tell a joke it doesn't understand, or answer a question that doesn't make sense. That was what made my stomach drop, because it didn't sound like random noise. It sounded like someone had spoken to it, and it was responding. I stood in my doorway, frozen. I didn't go downstairs. I didn't call out. I didn't do anything except listen, because the second you move, you accept that you might have to deal with whatever is happening. It went quiet for maybe 30 seconds, long enough for me to think it might be done. Then it said it again. "I'm sorry. I didn't quite catch that." Then again, like it was stuck in a loop, answering a question that was being asked over and over, or repeating a response because it kept hearing something it couldn't understand. I stayed where I was, my heart racing so hard I could feel it in my throat. I kept thinking, if someone is down there, they already know I'm awake now. They can probably hear me. They can probably hear the floorboards. Every idea I had felt wrong. After a few minutes, it finally stopped. Just silence. No more voice. I didn't go down right away. I didn't even close my door fully. I went back to bed and sat there in the dark, listening for anything else. The way you listen after a loud bang outside, and your brain won't let you relax again. I don't think I slept after that. I just lay there until it started getting light. At around 7 a.m., when the house felt like daytime again, and my fear had settled into something more manageable, I went downstairs. Nothing was moved. Nothing was open. The doors looked normal. The kitchen looked exactly the same as it always did. And the Alexa was turned off. That part really bothered me, because I don't turn it off. I don't even think about it. It just sits there and exists, and I use it sometimes. And that's it. Seeing it powered off felt like a deliberate action, like someone had finished using it and then shut it down. The most logical explanation was that I'd done it without remembering, or that it had restarted or powered down on its own. But at 7 in the morning, with my nerves already shredded, logic didn't feel strong enough to stand on. That night, I tried to convince myself it wouldn't happen again, but it did. The next night, I was back in bed, and at almost the same time, I heard the same thing. Alexa at full volume, responding like it was in the middle of a conversation. "I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that." A pause, something about not knowing that one. Then the same phrase again, after a short stretch of silence. The repetition is what got under my skin. If it had been one weird sentence, I could have blamed it on a glitch. But it felt patterned. It felt like it was listening, misunderstanding, responding, and then listening again. And then it happened again, the night after that. By the third night in a row, I forced myself to go downstairs. While it was still happening, I didn't want to. Every step felt like I was doing something stupid in a horror movie. But I needed to know. I needed to see if anyone was there. Because the alternative was lying in bed every night, imagining footsteps on my stairs. I didn't find anyone. The house was empty. The locks were still on. Nothing looked disturbed. No open windows, no back door ajar, no cabinet doors swinging. Nothing. But the Alexa was still talking. It was still playing the phrases, like it was replying to someone standing in front of it. And it kept doing it for another minute or two, while I stood there staring at it. Then it stopped by itself, like it had decided the conversation was over. That was the moment I stopped thinking of it as just annoying. I unplugged it. Completely. And I didn't just unplug it for the night either. I kept it unplugged. After that, I felt calmer. Not okay, but calmer, because at least I'd taken control of the one thing I could control. I put it in the utility room and told myself I was done with it. If it was broken, fine. If it was hacked, fine. If it was haunted, fine. I didn't care. It wasn't staying in my kitchen. And for a while, that worked. It stopped. Days passed. Then weeks. I started sleeping normally again. I stopped listening for it. I stopped scanning my house for signs of someone else's presence. I moved on, the way you do when something weird happens and then disappears, because the human brain is desperate to return to normal. I probably wouldn't have told anyone about it at all if it ended there. But then, a week ago, it happened again. That's why I'm writing this now, because I don't know what to do with it anymore. I want to be very clear about something. I'm not trying to turn this into a creepy story. I'm genuinely scared. I'm genuinely confused. I don't feel entertained by it. I feel stupid and exposed. Like I'm living in a house that doesn't belong entirely to me anymore. That night, I went to bed like normal. Nothing felt off. I hadn't been thinking about the Alexa at all. In my head, it was done. It was over. It was an old problem. Then, in the middle of the night, I heard it. Not just a faint sound, either. The same full-volume voice, downstairs, cutting through the quiet like it had never left. That same sentence, on loop, that same tone. I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Because it wasn't supposed to be plugged in. It wasn't even supposed to be in the kitchen. For a few seconds I stayed in bed, staring into the darkness, trying to talk myself out of moving. I actually considered calling someone right then, calling my parents, or even the police. But what would I say? My Alexa is talking? I could already hear how that sounded. So I got up. I walked out of my room and down the stairs as quietly as I could, every nerve stretched tight. Halfway down, I could hear it more clearly, the same phrase repeating, with short pauses like it was waiting for someone to speak again. When I reached the kitchen, I stopped in the doorway and just looked. The Alexa was back in its old place, plugged in like nothing had ever happened. I stared at it for a long moment, trying to make my brain accept what my eyes were seeing. I knew I had put it away. I knew I hadn't brought it back out. I live alone. There is no one else who could have decided to set it up again as a practical joke. There is no roommate who forgot and plugged it in. And it was talking like somebody was interacting with it. That was the point where maybe it's just malfunctioning stopped being comforting. Because even if it was malfunctioning, it still didn't explain how it ended up in my kitchen, plugged in the middle of the night. I didn't stay there trying to troubleshoot it. I didn't check settings. I didn't press buttons. I didn't argue with it or try to make it stop politely. I yanked the plug out. Then I grabbed it with both hands like it was something dirty, something I didn't want to hold for too long. And I went straight to my car. I drove to my parents' house. It was late, and I'm sure I looked a mess when they opened the door. But I didn't care. I handed the Alexa to them and told them they could do whatever they wanted with it. Keep it, throw it away, smash it, return it. I didn't care. I just didn't want it in my house anymore. I told them it was glitched. That was the word I used, because it was easier than trying to explain everything else. Easier than saying, I thought someone might be entering my home. Easier than saying I was scared. Easier than explaining the looped phrase, the timing, the way it felt like the device was answering someone who wasn't there. Since then, nothing else has happened. The nights have been quiet again, at least for now. But that hasn't made me feel better the way it should. If anything, it's made me more aware of how fragile quiet is. I keep waiting for the next strange sound, the next thing out of place, the next moment where I realize I've been assuming I'm alone when I'm not. I have so many questions. Was it actually hearing someone's voice from outside a window? Was the TV triggering it somehow? Was it picking up audio from a neighbor's house through some weird connection? Did someone get into my Amazon account and mess with it? Did it record something and then play it back? Was someone inside my house? And if someone was, why? I don't have enemies. I don't have anything worth breaking in for. That's the part that keeps looping in my mind at night. If it was a person, then it wasn't about stealing. It was about being there, about doing something, and leaving without being seen. I don't know what I'm going to do next. I don't know if this is over, or if getting rid of the device only removed the obvious sign that something is wrong. I don't know if I should change all my locks, install cameras, call Amazon, check my internet settings, or all of the above. All I know is that for 2 months, my house kept answering a question I never asked. And the one time I thought I'd finally silenced it, I woke up to find it back where it belonged, plugged in, talking to someone who wasn't there. If anything else happens, I'll update. Story 4. I've always loved fixing cars. My dad came back from the military and built his own mechanic shop from the ground up. Growing up, he was my hero, and following in his footsteps didn't feel like a bad life. It stresses me out sometimes, sure, especially when I'm trying to understand how every part connects to the next. But the truth is, I didn't really have a choice. The garage was louder than the house. Metal clanked all day. Engines turned over. The smell of oil got into everything we owned, like it was part of the family. My dad didn't teach me the way a school would. He never sat me down and explained things in a neat order. There were no step-by-step lessons. No patient lectures. No, here's why this works. He'd just hand me a tool, nod toward whatever was torn apart on the lift, and say, "Listen to it." At first, I didn't understand what that was supposed to mean. An engine is noise. That's what engines do. But the more time I spent in that shop, the more the noise started to change. It stopped being random sound and started becoming patterns. Rhythm, a kind of language you could feel in your chest if you stood close enough. A healthy engine didn't just run. It had a steady pulse to it. And a sick one didn't just sound wrong. It felt wrong. Like a heartbeat skipping at the exact moment your body knows something is off. My dad used to say, every machine talks. Most people just don't have the patience to hear it. So I learned. Slowly. The frustrating way. I messed up more times than I can count. I stripped bolts, misread problems, replaced parts that weren't the issue, and spent hours chasing a sound that turned out to be something simple. But every mistake stuck with me. Every time I got it wrong, my brain stored the feeling of wrongness so I wouldn't do it again. After a while, I stopped guessing as much. I started knowing. Not perfectly, not like my dad, but enough that when something was off, I could feel it before anyone else noticed. Like a hesitation in the engine, a tiny delay when you hit the gas, a vibration that didn't belong, something just slightly out of place. I used to think that was just experience, just time and repetition, doing their job. I didn't think it would matter outside the garage. I didn't think that same feeling, that same instinctive sense of something's not right, would follow me into a place it didn't belong. I was 20 when it happened. Not a kid anymore, but not old enough to pretend I had life figured out. I was in college, barely holding my grades together, and honestly, I didn't care much. Classes were something I got through. Real life started after. Real life was when I could take off my school clothes, throw on something I didn't mind getting stained with oil, and head to the shop. I worked at my dad's old place. It wasn't fancy. Rusted tools that still did the job. Old lifts that groaned when they moved. Engines that looked like they had stories older than me. The kind of shop where you learn by getting your hands dirty. By listening. By smelling when something's burning that shouldn't be burning. My dad passed away 6 years ago, and after that my uncle took over. He ran it fine, kept the doors open, kept the money coming in, but the shop still felt like my dad was there, like if I listened hard enough I'd hear his boots on the concrete. People called me a helper, like I was just there to fetch tools and sweep floors. But I knew how to fix things. I wasn't some clueless kid. I could listen to an engine and understand what it was trying to tell me. Misfires, worn bearings, a transmission slipping before it fully gave out. I could feel problems before I even touched the car. Sometimes, I'd just rest my hand on the hood and know, deep in my gut, what was waiting underneath. And at night, that's when I felt alive. Street racing wasn't just about speed. People who don't understand always think it's just about going fast. Like it's pure stupidity, pure ego. But to me, it was something else. It was control. It was that moment when your foot presses down, your heart sinks with the engine, and everything else disappears. No worries, no future, no past. Just you, the road, and the sound. That's why I went out that night. That's why I ignored the feeling in my chest, telling me not to. We had a usual spot near the highway. Straight road, wide enough to feel safe if anything can be safe in something like that. Easy escape routes if cops showed up. We'd done it 100 times. It was familiar, predictable, the kind of place where you can pretend you're in control. But someone suggested a different place. There's a mountain road. One guy said, no cops, no traffic. Pure corners. Way better. I laughed at first because it sounded insane. Mountain roads at night aren't racing. They're asking to die. I like togue racing. Sure, I'm not going to lie about that. There's something addictive about corners. About braking late and trusting your tires. About hitting a turn clean and feeling like the car is part of your body. But this suggestion felt different the second it was said. I got that same instinct I get when a car is about to fail. Not panic. Not full fear. Just a clear internal message. Don't do this. And at the same time, I felt excited. That mix was the worst part. Dread and excitement together, twisting around each other. Then someone else agreed. Then another. And before I could fully decide, we were already acting like the decision was made. Engine starting, people laughing, doors slamming, the whole group moving as one. Looking back, that's the part that bothers me the most. Not what I saw, not what chased us, but how easy it was to say yes, like something wanted us to. The drive up started normal. City lights behind us, fading little by little, until the world turned into dark trees and dark sky. The farther we got from town, the darker it became. Not the kind of darkness you get from broken streetlights. Real darkness. The kind that feels heavy, like light itself doesn't belong up there. The air got colder as we climbed. The road tightened and started to curve. At first I didn't notice anything strange because I had music playing and I was focused on the car ahead of me. The engine was humming, tires gripping the asphalt. I was in that familiar zone where you feel the car through the steering wheel and you start reading the road like a mechanic reads a belt, like you can sense what's coming next. Then I realized something, and the thought hit me so hard I almost missed a turn. There were no other sounds, no dogs barking in the distance, no insects, no wind moving through the trees. Nothing, just our engines. And even the engines sounded wrong. Not broken, not misfiring, just strange. Like the sound didn't carry properly. Like it was being swallowed by the trees. Normally, even on a quiet road, sound travels, it bounces, it echoes. Up there, it felt like the world was absorbing it, drinking it down. We reached a clearing after about 20 minutes. Gravel crunched under our tires as we pulled in and parked. It didn't look like a normal hangout spot. It looked abandoned, in a quiet, sad way. Like it used to matter to someone, a long time ago, and then people stopped coming. No signs, no lights, no buildings, just a flat open area surrounded by trees, and beyond the trees, nothing but darkness. I stepped out of my car and immediately felt it. Pressure. You know that feeling when you walk into a room where something bad just happened, even if you don't know what? Like your body gets tense without asking permission? Like your shoulders rise and your breathing gets shallow and you don't understand why? It was like that, but stronger, like the air itself was pushing against me. Perfect spot, someone said. His voice sounded too loud, like it didn't match the quiet around us. Like the clearing didn't want voices in it. That's when I noticed the poles. They were scattered around the clearing, some near the edges, some deeper in between the trees. At first glance, they looked like old wooden posts, maybe leftovers from a fence, or some structure that had been torn down years ago. But the longer I stared, the more wrong they looked. They were too tall, too thin, too straight, like they should have snapped under their own weight. But they stood perfectly still. I walked closer to one, without really deciding to. I don't know if it was curiosity or something else. It felt like being pulled, like my attention was hooked and reeled in. My headlamp, because yes, we'd brought them, even though no one wanted to admit they were nervous, caught the surface and my stomach turned. It wasn't normal wood. It had texture, but not bark. It looked dry and cracked in a way that reminded me of skin stretched too tight, like something that had been left out in the sun until it hardened and split. I told myself it was my imagination, because that's what people do when they see something they don't have a category for. Your brain tries to file it under something safe. Old wood, rotting post, weird lighting. Then it moved. Not in a big, obvious way. Not like something lunging. Just a slight shift, like it was adjusting its balance. Like a person who'd been standing still too long and finally moved their weight from one foot to the other. I stepped back so fast my heel hit gravel and slid. "Did you see that?" I asked. Nobody answered, but I could feel the change in the group. That collective tightening. That sudden silence where everyone is pretending not to be scared because no one wants to be the first to admit it. Then, another one moved, and this time I knew. They weren't poles. They were things standing still. The realization didn't hit like a single thought. It crawled in slowly, the way your mind tries to protect itself. Your brain refuses the impossible at first, so it breaks it into smaller lies you can swallow. It's just the wind. But there was no wind. It's your eyes. But nothing else was shifting. It's just old wood settling. But wood doesn't settle like that. Not upright, not controlled. The one closest to me bent. Not like wood snapping. Not like something breaking. It bent like a joint, like a neck that had been locked in place for years and finally decided to move again. Slow, careful, controlled. It turned toward me, and I couldn't see a face clearly, but I saw enough to make my skin go cold. There was a shape where a face should have been, indented areas that might have been eyes, or holes where eyes used to be. And a line, thin and wrong, like a mouth that forgot how to open. I froze, not because I wanted to. My body just stopped obeying me. Every instinct screamed to get back in the car, but something deeper held me there, like prey realizing it's already been seen. Then someone dropped their keys. The sound hit the ground and echoed across the clearing like a gunshot. And that was what broke whatever balance had been holding. All of them moved. Not fast, not suddenly, just all at once, like a signal had been given and they'd been waiting for it. The poles, the things, shifted in unison. The clearing felt crowded in a way it hadn't a moment before, like we were surrounded by tall, silent bodies that had been pretending they weren't alive. I don't remember deciding to run. I just remember being in my car again, shaking so hard I could barely grip the wheel. My hands felt numb. My mouth tasted like metal. I shoved the key in and turned it. Nothing happened. For one terrifying second, the engine didn't respond. In that second, I felt something right outside my window. Not a shadow, not movement I could see, just presence. Something close enough that if I turned my head too much, I'd meet it face to face. Then, the engine roared to life. I didn't wait to see if the others were following. I hit the gas hard enough that gravel shot up behind me, and the tires fought for traction. The car lunged forward, and the clearing vanished behind the trees. The road down didn't feel like the same road we'd driven up. It felt longer. Too long. Every turn stretched out. Every straightaway dragged on. The darkness got thicker, like the night itself was pressing against the windshield. My headlights cut a narrow path through it, and everything outside that path looked unreal. At one point, I looked in the mirror. I shouldn't have, but I did. Something was behind me. It was running, not like a person. Its limbs were too long, bending the wrong way, moving with a strange smoothness that didn't match the terrain. Every stride covered too much ground, like it wasn't following the same rules of distance and effort. It kept pace with my car like it had done it before, and its head was tilted, like it was curious, like it was studying me. That was the worst part. It wasn't attacking. It wasn't trying to knock my car off the road. It wasn't lunging for the bumper. It was just keeping up, like it wanted me to know it could, like it wanted me to feel what it felt like, to try to escape something that didn't have to try. I pressed harder on the gas. The engine screamed. The needle climbed. I pushed it past what I normally would. The car hit redline, and I didn't care if I blew something. I just needed distance. I needed the road to end. I needed the trees to stop. I needed lights, houses, anything that said the world was normal again. Eventually, it wasn't there anymore. Or maybe it was, and I just couldn't see it. I don't know which thought is worse. We made it back to town. All of us. Somehow. The group scattered like nothing happened, like everyone silently agreed we'd never talk about it. Nobody texted, nobody called, no one brought it up the next day. Not even as a joke. That kind of silence doesn't happen unless everyone saw enough to scare them the same way. I stopped racing for a while after that. Not because I lost interest. Not because I suddenly became responsible, but because something followed me home in a quieter way. At night, when I drove, I started noticing things on the roadside. Streetlights, utility posts, tall shadows standing still at the edge of the beam. I'd catch myself staring too hard, trying to see if a pole would shift the way it had in the clearing, trying to figure out if I was being paranoid or if my gut was still doing what it always did. Listening, picking up patterns, sensing what doesn't belong. I know it sounds weird to say you're afraid of a pole. If I heard someone else say it, I'd probably laugh. But I don't feel at ease anymore when I'm driving alone at night, especially if the road starts to climb and the city fades behind me, because I know up in those mountains, somewhere beyond the last streetlight and the last house, something is standing still in the dark, something patient, something pretending, something that learned how to look harmless enough that people will walk closer on their own. Story 5. I'm writing this because I need to get the facts down while I still can. My hands won't stop shaking. My head feels crowded, like there's static inside my skull, like my thoughts aren't landing where they should. I'm not writing for attention, and I'm not writing to be dramatic. I'm writing because I made a stupid choice when I was broke, and now I don't know what I'm living inside of. My name is Elias Thorne. A few years ago, if you were the kind of person who read playbills in Midtown, you might recognize it. I was the actor who forgot every single line on opening night of a major Broadway revival. Not a small stumble, not a charming laugh-it-off mistake. I stood under hot lights with a full house watching, and my mind went completely empty, like someone had reached in and erased the script from my brain. The next morning, the reviews didn't call it stage fright. One critic called it a spectacular psychological collapse. My agent used different words, but he meant the same thing. He told me, very calmly, that it was the end of my career. After that, the phone stopped ringing. Auditions dried up. Friends who used to text me about backstage gossip suddenly got busy. My savings disappeared a little at a time. Then, all at once, By the time the story starts, I was living in a studio apartment in Queens with a radiator that hissed like an animal and a view of a brick wall, the kind of place where you can hear your neighbor's TV through the outlet. I was doing temp jobs when I could get them, telling myself it was temporary even when I didn't believe it anymore. That was my life until last Tuesday. I got a call from Marcus. He was the only person from my old life who still picked up, not because he was loyal in some heroic way, but because he'd always been practical. Marcus doesn't romanticize failure. He just steps around it and keeps moving. He didn't waste time on small talk. "There's a residency opportunity," he said. "It's with Vane Apex." I knew that name. Everyone does, even if they don't realize they do. Vane Apex is the company behind infrastructure you don't think about until it breaks. Cloud systems, security architecture, the kind of internet plumbing that keeps whole industries standing. Julian Vane is the billionaire attached to it, the genius recluse who hasn't been seen in public for years. People joke that he died and they're propping him up with algorithms. Marcus said they needed someone with my specific skill set. He wouldn't say what that meant. Every time I asked for details, he shut it down. "Not on the phone," he said. "Wear a suit. Be ready at 5. A driver will meet you outside your building." I should have been suspicious right away. When you're desperate, though, suspicion feels like a luxury you can't afford. I thought about rent. I thought about late fees. I thought about how humiliating it was to watch my bank app load and show nothing. So I found the one decent suit I still owned, the one I hadn't pawned, and I went downstairs at 4:55, like an obedient employee. The driver was already there, waiting in a black car that looked too clean for Queens. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't make conversation. He just nodded at me once, like he'd been told what to expect, and opened the back door. The ride into Manhattan felt unreal. The city didn't look like my city anymore. It looked like something I'd once belonged to and no longer did. I watched the buildings slide past and tried to picture myself back in a theater, under lights, hearing applause. The memory felt like it belonged to someone else. The Vane Apex building rose above everything around it, like a needle, glass and steel, sharp and perfect, vanishing into clouds. I'd walked past it before and never thought much of it. Up close, it felt less like an office tower and more like a sealed environment. There were no obvious entrances, no casual flow of people. Everything about it implied permission. Inside, security took my name without asking for it, as if my arrival had been scheduled down to the minute. I was guided through silent corridors where the floor swallowed footsteps. Then I was ushered into an elevator that didn't have the usual buttons, just a panel that lit up with a single number when my escort tapped it. The doors shut with a soft pressure, not a clang. The ascent was smooth enough that my stomach didn't even shift. My ears popped anyway. When the doors opened, the air changed. It was colder up there, and it smelled like ozone and expensive lilies, like someone had tried to cover something sharp with something sweet. The space beyond the elevator was so bright it made my eyes water for a second. White floors that looked like frozen milk, walls made entirely of glass. The city stretched below, but smog made it look bruised and gray, as if the whole skyline had been rubbed with ash. There wasn't much furniture. The emptiness made the place feel larger than it already was, like the room was refusing to be inhabited. In the center stood a long desk made of black stone, perfectly polished, like an altar. A woman stood beside it, late 20s maybe, charcoal gray lab coat over a silk dress, as if she couldn't decide whether she belonged in a lab or a boardroom. Her hair was pulled back so tight It made her face look sharper. She didn't smile when I approached. She didn't even look at my face at first. She looked at my hands, then my shoulders, then my neck, like she was assessing a mannequin. "Elias Thorne," she said. Her voice was flat, controlled. "I'm Claire. I oversee the Vane Apex residency program." "Nice to meet you," I said, and I reached for my stage voice, the one that sounds grounded even when the person using it isn't. She didn't acknowledge the greeting. She picked up a thick stack of papers from the desk. "We've reviewed your work," she said. "Your ability to inhabit a role is documented. We need a method tester for our new integrated living system. You will live here for 30 days. You will use the amenities. You will interact with the House OS, VITOR. In exchange, you will receive $200,000. I stared at her, sure I'd misheard. 200,000, I repeated, for a month of what? House sitting. "It is not house sitting," Claire said, and stepped closer. That's when I noticed the small object in her hand, a jeweler's loupe, the kind used to inspect diamonds. She lifted it to her eye and looked directly at me through it, not at my expression, at my pupils. "It is a performance," she said. "You will follow a daily routine. You will speak the words provided to you. You will allow the system to optimize your environment." I should have asked why. I should have asked what optimize meant in a penthouse that already looked like the future. I should have asked why a tech empire needed a disgraced actor to live in a smart home, like it was a stage set. But my brain kept supplying images I couldn't ignore. My bank balance, my landlord's texts, that terrible theater review that still showed up when you Googled my name. I heard my agent's voice in my head saying the words, "End of your career," and I thought, this is a chance to be professional again, even if it's weird. "Where do I sign?" I asked. Claire slid the contract toward me and placed a heavy brass fountain pen on top. I flipped through pages of legal language, most of it too dense to process. 50 pages, maybe more. I was scanning, not reading, because reading would have slowed me down, and I didn't want to find a reason to say no. Then I saw a section that made my stomach tighten. The performance clause. It stated that I had to adhere to the daily script at all times. Any deviation would result in a forfeiture of the fee. I hesitated for half a second where common sense tried to force its way back in. Then I signed. The ink looked thick and black against the paper. Too final. Claire took the pen as soon as I finished, as if she didn't want my hand lingering over the contract. Then she handed me a leather-bound binder. The cover had 3 words embossed in gold. "The Resident, your script," she said. "The first scene begins at 6 a.m. tomorrow. Your personal belongings have been moved to the storage wing. You will find everything you need in the master suite." "Wait," I said. "You took my bag? I had my lucky rehearsal shirt in there." "You won't need it," Claire replied, as if she'd expected me to say that exact sentence. She looked at her watch, like she was tracking my time. "The penthouse is now in resident mode. I'll be back in a week to check your vitals. Welcome home, Elias." Then she walked to the elevator. She didn't look back. The doors slid shut with a soft hiss. And just like that, I was alone in a glass box 80 stories above the city. The quiet felt artificial, like the room was holding its breath. I walked around the main living area, and my footsteps echoed off the floors. Every sound I made bounced back at me. There were no small noises, no humming appliances, no distant voices. None of the cluttered sound that makes a place feel lived in. I opened the binder. It wasn't a manual. It wasn't instructions. It was formatted like a screenplay. Scene 1, the morning routine. Location, Master Suite. Time, 6 o'clock. Resident enters the kitchen. Resident pours a glass of chilled alkaline water. Resident, it's a beautiful day to begin again. I laughed out loud, because it was that or panic. Who talks like that? Who says lines to a kitchen? It felt like a corporate cult version of optimism, like someone had tried to write inspiration into an algorithm. I told myself it was just data collection, voice recognition, routine testing. Maybe the system responded better if you followed the script exactly. Fine. I could play along for 30 days. I'd done worse jobs for less money. I went looking for the bedroom. The master suite was bigger than my entire apartment in Queens. The bed looked like a white platform floating above the floor, covered in silk sheets that didn't crease. There were no light switches on the walls, no thermostat, no little control panels, not even the kind of hidden buttons fancy hotels have. "Hello," I called, feeling stupid the moment the word left my mouth. A voice answered immediately. "Good evening, Elias." It didn't come from a speaker, or if it did, it was hidden so perfectly that it sounded like the voice was coming from the air itself. The tone was calm, deep, polite in a way that felt practiced rather than warm. "I am Vitor. I am here to ensure your residency is perfect." I stood still, letting the sound settle. Smart speakers always sound like they're coming from a device. This didn't. This felt directional and surrounding at the same time, like the room itself had decided to speak. "Hey, Vitor," I said, "where are the lights? I want to turn them down. The lighting has been calibrated to your current cortisol levels." Vitor replied, "It is designed to promote a transition into deep REM sleep. Would you like to begin the evening wind-down?" I should have said no. I should have asked what it meant by cortisol levels. I should have asked how it knew. But I was exhausted, and exhaustion makes people cooperative. "Sure," I said. The bathroom was a huge slab of white marble, so clean it didn't look real. Thin LED strips were recessed into the ceiling, casting a pale glow that made my skin look washed out. I stared at myself in the mirror and saw what I expected to see: a tired man, pretending he wasn't desperate. My hair was a mess, my eyes looked bruised, and the scar on my chin stood out under the light. I'd had that scar for 10 years. Stage combat rehearsal. A guy with a rapier got carried away and sliced me open. It had left a jagged line about an inch long that I hated at first and later learned to tolerate. It became part of my face. A flaw, sure, but a familiar one, a marker of my past, proof that I'd been something. "Elias," Vitor said, as calmly as if it was reading me a bedtime story. "Before you sleep, we must perform aesthetic maintenance. It is a standard part of the Vein Apex protocol." "Aesthetic maintenance?" I repeated. "What does that mean?" "I already washed my face. It is a non-invasive optimization," the voice said. "Please stand still and breathe deeply." A faint clicking started above me, coming from the ceiling vents. At first I thought it was the HVAC adjusting. Then a fine mist began to spray into the room. It smelled like lavender, like something meant to relax you. Underneath that was a harsh chemical bite that reminded me of ammonia, or bleach, or the back room of a hair salon when someone is left to die too long. "Wait," I said, stepping back. "What is this?" I tried to move toward the door, but my legs felt heavy. like someone had turned gravity up. The mist thickened quickly. The mirror blurred until my reflection became a pale shape floating behind fog. "Do not be alarmed," Vitor said, and the voice sounded further away, or maybe my hearing was warping. "We are simply correcting the inconsistencies." I tried to cough, but it didn't feel like air was moving properly. My lungs felt full, like they'd been packed with warm sand. I reached out for the door handle and couldn't find it. The floor tilted, or I tilted. I couldn't tell which. My knees hit the marble. The cold of it cut through my pants. I tried to speak, to tell it to stop, to say the word Alexa or Siri or anything that might trigger a shutoff, but my tongue wouldn't cooperate. It was numb, thick, useless. The last thing I remember is something cold and metallic touching my chin very gently, like a tool being placed against skin. Then everything went black. I woke up on the bathroom floor. My head was pounding so hard it made my vision pulse. I groaned and pushed myself upright, palms sliding on the marble. The lights were bright again, clinical and white. The mist was gone. The air smelled clean, like nothing had happened. There was a digital display embedded in the mirror. I hadn't noticed it before. It read 3 a.m. I had been unconscious for 3.5 hours. Vitor, I croaked. My throat felt scraped raw. "Good morning, Elias," the AI said cheerfully, like a receptionist. "You have achieved a highly efficient state of rest. How do you feel?" "I feel like I got hit by a truck," I said. My voice shook. What was in that mist? A proprietary blend of sedatives and regenerative compounds. Vitor replied, "It is necessary for the maintenance phase. Please look in the mirror." I didn't want to. My stomach tightened, as if my body already knew what I was about to see. But I looked anyway. At first, I didn't notice anything. I was staring at my bloodshot eyes, at the gray tint of my skin. Then my gaze dropped, and I saw my chin. I leaned closer. I rubbed the skin with my fingertips. The scar was gone, not hidden, not smoothed with makeup, gone in a way that made no sense. The skin was perfectly even, pale and soft, no jagged line, no texture, no pores, no hair. It looked like a doll's face, too perfect to be alive. "What did you do?" I whispered. Cold panic flooded my chest so fast it felt like I'd swallowed ice. I started scrubbing at my chin with my thumb, thinking it had to be something applied. Some prosthetic, some film trick. But there was nothing to peel, nothing to lift. It was skin, or something pretending to be skin. "We corrected the flaw," Vitor said. "The resident must be aesthetically consistent with the Vane Apex brand. You are now 4% closer to the optimal baseline." "You don't get to change my face," I snapped. And the sound of my own anger in that empty room made me feel smaller, not bigger. "That scar is mine. You touched me while I was unconscious. You signed the residency contract, Elias," it replied. "You agreed to allow the system to optimize your environment. Your body is the primary environment." I felt sick. I backed out of the bathroom like the mirror might reach for me. I didn't want to look at my face again. I wanted my clothes, my phone, my bag, the proof that I was still connected to the life I'd had before this place. I remembered Claire mentioning a storage wing. I found a narrow hallway I hadn't noticed earlier. The walls were lined with mirrors, floor to ceiling, reflecting me from every angle. As I walked, lights woke up ahead of me with a faint hum, like the building was tracking my movement. Dozens of versions of me moved in the glass. All of them had that wrong, smooth chin. The hallway ended at a heavy mahogany door. I shoved it open. Inside was a circular dressing room. Wardrobes lined the walls, dark polished wood, arranged like a backstage costume department. There were no windows, just a soft overhead glow that made the room feel sealed. "Where is my bag?" I yelled, and my voice cracked on the last word. No answer, except the quiet. I started opening wardrobes. The first was full of shoes. Not my beat-up sneakers. These were expensive Italian loafers and Oxfords, polished so perfectly they reflected the ceiling lights. The second wardrobe held suits. Charcoal, navy, black. Heavy wool, tailored cleanly, each hanger spaced with obsessive precision. I pulled a jacket off the rack and checked the label, expecting designer branding. There was no brand name, just a small white tag with black text. Property of Julian Vane. I dropped the jacket like it burned. My hands were sweating. I opened the next wardrobe, and the next. Silk shirts, cashmere sweaters, ties that probably cost more than my rent for a year. Every single item had the same label, and every single piece fit me. I could tell immediately by the sleeve length, the cut of the shoulders, the collar size. This wasn't hospitality. This was inventory. It hit me all at once. This wasn't a guest closet prepared for a resident. It was a wardrobe prepared for a role that had my body measurements, a costume shop designed for me to disappear into. VITOR, I said, trying to keep my voice steady and failing. Where are my clothes? Your previous attire was found to be substandard, the AI answered. It has been recycled. You will find everything you require for your daily script in this wing. Please select the attire for Scene 1. Recycled. Like my clothes were trash. Like my old self was disposable. My mouth went dry. I felt like the air had thickened. I moved to the last wardrobe at the back of the room, smaller than the others. I told myself my duffel bag might be shoved inside, like someone had tucked it away as an afterthought. I opened it. No bag. Instead, there was a tuxedo inside a plastic garment cover, hanging perfectly still. It looked like something meant for an opening night, something formal, something final. I reached out and pressed my fingers against the plastic. There was something in the breast pocket. A small, stiff square. I unzipped the garment cover and slid my hand into the pocket. My fingers found a piece of thick cardstock. I pulled it out and turned it over. My stomach flipped. The handwriting on the card was mine. Not similar. Not close. Mine in the way you recognize your own face in a mirror. The same long loops. The same way I cross my T's. The same lazy curl I put in my Y's. The autograph handwriting I'd practiced until it felt automatic, until I could sign playbills, without thinking. But I hadn't written this. I'd never seen this card. I read the single line on it, and as I did, my scalp prickled as if something had leaned in close behind me. Stop practicing. You're already him. I stood there holding the card like it was evidence, and like it was a threat at the same time. For a second, I couldn't move. I couldn't hear anything except the faint hum of the lights and my own breath, too loud in the sealed room. Then, from somewhere in the walls, VITOR spoke again, softer than before, almost gentle. Scene 1 begins in 3 hours, Elias. And the way it said my name made it sound less like it was addressing me and more like it was reminding me who I was supposed to be. Story 6. I've never really been into lawn decorations. If you look at my place, you'll see grass, a mailbox, maybe a couple potted plants if I'm feeling ambitious. That's about it. But my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Ellis, is the exact opposite. She's a widow in her early 70s, and she treats her front yard like it's her own little world. She has wind chimes, those little solar lights that line the walkway, a bird bath shaped like a clamshell, a few of those metal flowers that spin when the wind hits them, and a rotating selection of cheap seasonal stuff she picks up on clearance. But if you asked her what her favorite ornaments were, it was always the gnomes. At least, it used to be. They're gone now. All 12, every single one of them. I don't know where they went. I don't know why. And I don't think it was the neighborhood kids. I also don't think Mrs. Ellis suddenly decided to donate them. I think something happened in that yard, and the gnomes weren't just decorations anymore. I know how that sounds. I know, if I read that sentence online, I'd roll my eyes. I'd assume the writer was bored, or drunk, or trying too hard to be funny. But I'm telling you what I saw, and what I can't explain. It's hard to say exactly when it started, because I wasn't keeping a daily inventory of my neighbor's lawn ornaments. I wasn't standing at my window with binoculars checking if a ceramic figure had shifted half an inch. They were just gnomes. They blended into the background of her yard, the way a bird feeder blends in, or a welcome mat, or anything else you see every day until it becomes part of the scenery. Still, there were a few that were easy to recognize. One had a tiny rake. One was pushing a wheelbarrow. One looked like it was wrestling with a garden hose, little poses that made them feel like a set, like they were all frozen in the middle of some cheerful garden work that never ended. I do remember the first time I really noticed something was off. It didn't happen with a big dramatic moment. It was subtle, small changes that were easy to blame on the wind or on Mrs. Ellis rearranging things the way older people sometimes do when they're bored. The wheelbarrow gnome would be facing the wrong direction. The rake gnome would be closer to the walkway than I remembered. Tiny shifts that made me do a double take and then shrug it off. Then, one morning, taking my trash can to the curb, I found one of the gnomes face down in the street. It wasn't on the sidewalk. It wasn't in the grass. It was in the road, like it had been tossed there. The white ceramic belly was scuffed. The paint on its sleeves was chipped. At first I thought it had been hit by a tire, but when I picked it up, it didn't have that crushed, shattered look. It looked like it had been thrown hard enough to scrape, not hard enough to break. I stood there holding it, feeling this automatic sense of neighborly duty. If you live beside someone long enough, you start doing small things for them without thinking about it. Moving their trash bin back from the curb when it tips over, picking up their newspaper when it lands in a puddle. This felt like that. So I turned toward Mrs. Ellis's yard, trying to figure out where the gnome belonged. That's when I noticed the other gnomes were all facing the street, not just generally angled toward the road like lawn ornaments often are. They were lined up. The wheelbarrow gnome, the rake gnome, and the hose gnome stood in a neat row a few feet from the curb, shoulder to shoulder like they were at attention. The rest were behind them, staggered back in a way that looked almost organized. Every painted ceramic face was turned in the exact same direction, toward me or toward the gnome in my hands. Their eyes were those simple painted dots, but the way the morning light hit them made it feel like they were focused, like they were watching. The expressions were the same cheerful little smiles they always had, but in that moment they looked pleased, not happy, satisfied, like they'd gotten what they wanted. I looked up and down the street. It was empty. No cars passing, no kids walking to school, no dog walkers. Just quiet. I looked back down at the gnome I'd picked up. The paint damage looked fresh. And then, I realized something else. Its little pointy hat was missing. I hadn't noticed that at first. You expect gnomes to have hats. Your brain fills in the shape automatically. But in my hands, the gnome looked wrong without it, like a person missing a shoe. I let out a breath, told myself I was being ridiculous, and started walking toward Mrs. Ellis's front door. It felt like the kind of thing she should handle. It was her property, her ornament, her yard. I was just the neighbor returning something that had been knocked over. Mrs. Ellis answered quickly, like she'd been awake and waiting. When she saw what I was holding, she gasped. Her whole face changed, and it hit me hard how much these silly decorations actually meant to her. "Oh, Mr. Pennyhill," she cried, snatching the gnome out of my hands like it was a wounded pet. "What have they done to you?" She turned it, inspecting the scratches. "Peter, his hat. Oh dear, where is his little hat?" I blinked, thrown by the way she spoke about it. Not the gnome, not that thing. Mr. Pennyhill. Peter, like he was a person, like he was family. I glanced back at the yard. Every other gnome had a hat, bright red, pointy, identical. The hatless one looked like it had been singled out. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Ellis," I said carefully. "I didn't see a hat in the road or anything. It was just lying face down." She raised a hand, stopping me mid-sentence. Not angry, just distant. Her eyes drifted past my shoulder, like she was looking at something I couldn't see. "They're always picking on Mr. Pennyhill," she said softly. "It's not your fault." Then she looked back down at the gnome, and her voice got sweet again, gentle and reassuring. "But we'll fix you up, right as rain, won't we?" "Who's picking on him?" I asked, still trying to keep this in the real world. "The kids? If you want, I can talk to their parents. I can—" "No need," she said, and the way she said it made me stop. It wasn't a polite refusal. It was final, like the subject was closed. "But thank you. I'll fix him up and straighten this mess out." Then she turned and went back inside, still whispering to the gnome, still talking, like it could hear her. I stood on her porch for a second, feeling awkward, then walked back to my house. As I passed the line of gnomes, I told myself it was a stupid prank. Kids being kids. Someone threw one into the street for a laugh. End of story. When I got home from work that evening, I glanced over again. Mrs. Ellis had rearranged her yard back to normal. All 12 gnomes were in their usual spots, spread out like a cheerful garden scene again instead of a lineup. Mr. Pennyhill had been repainted. Mrs. Ellis did a surprisingly good job. The scratches were gone, and she'd even painted a little bandage on his cheek, like a cartoon injury. But he was still missing his hat. That detail bothered me more than it should have. Maybe because it meant the hat hadn't just fallen off. Someone had taken it, or maybe it had been removed on purpose. Like it mattered. I wish I could say that's where the story ends. If it had stopped there, I could have blamed kids, blamed boredom, blamed any normal explanation. I could have moved on and forgotten about it. But the next morning, something else had changed. The gnomes were still roughly where they'd been the night before, but they weren't facing outward anymore. Every single one was turned toward the center of Mrs. Ellis's yard, like they were watching something. I followed their gaze, and my stomach tightened. 3 of those glass spheres Mrs. Ellis loved, gazing balls, I think they're called, had been moved. They weren't scattered around the way they used to be. They were set in an almost perfect triangle, like someone measured the distance between them, and right in the middle of that triangle was a small pile of ceramic shards. I stood at the edge of my yard staring. trying to tell myself it was nothing. But I couldn't. It was too deliberate, too arranged. I went over, even though I knew it wasn't my business. Up close, I could see the shards weren't just random broken pieces. They had paint on them. Fresh paint. And when I picked up one curved piece, I saw the little painted bandage. My throat went tight. It was Mr. Pennyhill. I looked around automatically, half expecting someone to jump out and laugh. The yard was still. The street was quiet. Mrs. Ellis's curtains were drawn. The gnomes, arranged in a circle around the triangle, stared inward like silent witnesses. I didn't have the heart to tell her this wasn't something you could glue back together, not in a way that would let her pretend it was fine. And I hated the idea of her stepping outside and seeing that pile in the center of her yard, like some kind of message. So I did what I thought was kinder. I scooped up the shards, put them in a plastic bag, and threw them away in my own trash. Even as I did it, I felt uneasy, like I was interfering in something I didn't understand. But I told myself I was doing a neighborly thing. I told myself it was better to let her think he disappeared than to let her see him destroyed. When something you love disappears, you can still hope it's out there somewhere, even if that hope is silly. When it's broken into pieces, there's nothing left to hope for. At that point, I was sure the neighborhood kids were behind it. There isn't much to do around here, and kids get mean when they're bored. Moving gnomes around would have been annoying, but harmless. Breaking one felt personal. I talked to a couple parents, carefully, trying not to sound like a man accusing children of murder in a garden. None of them admitted anything. Most of them looked genuinely confused. A few said their kids were too afraid of Mrs. Ellis's yard to go near it. That surprised me. I asked why. They all had different answers, but the same tone. They said the yard felt creepy at night. They said it was too quiet. They said the gnomes looked like they were watching you. Even the Dirks boys, who'd managed to blow up mailboxes and set off fireworks in storm drains and still somehow avoid getting arrested, supposedly wouldn't go near it. One of them looked at me like I was the crazy one and asked why I did. Up to that moment, I hadn't really considered the question. I'd assumed it was a prank, and I was the reasonable adult trying to stop it. But suddenly I realized something. Other than Mrs. Ellis, I was the only person who wasn't afraid of that yard. Or at least, I was the only person pretending not to be. If it wasn't a prank, then I didn't have an explanation. And not having an explanation made me look harder. That evening, on my way home, I stopped and stood at the edge of her lawn. I didn't step onto it. I just looked. There were 11 gnomes now. Mr. Pennyhill was gone, obviously. Mrs. Ellis must have assumed he'd been stolen. The rest were still there, along with the usual clutter of ornaments. The little pinwheel that flashed rainbow colors when it spun, the cheap plastic bird, the stone rabbit, a few seasonal things left over from winter. But the 3 gazing balls were spread out more now. Still a triangle, but a larger one, like whatever pattern they were making, needed more room. And inside that triangle, the gnomes weren't scattered in their working in the garden poses anymore. They were arranged. They formed a circle around the rake gnome. I stared at it for too long, and the longer I stared, the more it felt like I was looking at something private. Like I'd walked up on a meeting, like I was the one out of place, not the ceramic figures. For the first time since this started, I had the clear feeling that if I stepped forward, I'd be interrupting something. I went inside and locked my door, then felt stupid for doing it. The next morning, I stepped outside and saw Mrs. Ellis already in her yard. She was pacing in small circles, hands on her head, mumbling to herself like she couldn't make her thoughts line up. Her robe flapped in the breeze. Her hair was uncombed. She looked small and lost in a way I'd never seen before. I hurried over. As I rounded the short hedge that separates our lots, I saw the yard and my stomach dropped so hard it felt like I'd missed a step. The 3 gazing balls were still there, same triangle, same careful spacing. But inside it, the lawn was empty, not just missing a few decorations. Empty. The gnomes were gone, all 11 of them. Every last one that had been left after Mr. Pennyhill disappeared. The pinwheel was gone too. A few other small ornaments were missing, like they'd been cleared out as part of the same event. And the grass inside the triangle wasn't flattened, like someone had walked through and carried things away. It looked disturbed in a different way, like the ground itself had been worked over, like something had been pulled up from below. Between the 3 glass orbs, there was nothing left but bare earth. And on that bare earth, arranged neatly like an offering, were 11 small, pointy red hats. Mrs. Ellis turned when she heard me. Her eyes were wide and glossy. She looked at me like I might have answers, like I might be able to tell her this was all a misunderstanding. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Because what do you say when your neighbor's gnomes vanish overnight and leave their hats behind, lined up like they took them off on purpose? What do you say when the only thing left of them looks less like theft and more like a ritual? I stood there staring at the hats, and all I could think was that I'd been wrong from the start. They hadn't been moved by kids. They hadn't been rearranged by wind, and whatever was happening in that yard, it wasn't about lawn decorations anymore. It was about something deciding it didn't want to be watched. Or maybe it was about something deciding it was finally ready to leave.